Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Parameshvara. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. This is working okay. Looks good. Good. Welcome to all of you, and welcome to all of our students watching online. We continue our study of Chapter 8. We'll begin with some recitation, starting with verse 16. Yeah. And as always, please look at the translation while I'm chanting, and then repeat after me. Abrahma bhuvana lokaha, Abrahma bhuvana lokaha, punaravarti norjuna, punaravarti norjuna, mamupetya tu kaunteya, mamupetya tu kaunteya, punarjanmana vidyate, punarjanmana vidyate, sahasrayuga paryantam, sahasrayuga paryantam, aharyad brahmano viduhu, aharyad brahmano viduhu, ratram yuga sahasrantam, ratram yuga sahasrantam, Teho ratra vido janaha, Teho ratra vido jana, avyaktad vyaktaya sarvaha, avyaktad vyaktaya sarvaha, prabhavantyah ragame, prabhavantyah ragame, ratragame pralihante, Ratryagame praliyante, tatraiva vyakta sanyake, tatraiva vyakta sanyake, bhutagrama sahevayam, bhutagrama sahevayam, bhutva bhutva praliyate, bhutva bhutva praliyate, Ratragame vasha partha, Ratragame vasha partha, Prabhavatyahar Prabhavatyahar Parasthasmatu bhavonyo, Parasthasmatu bhavonyo, Vyakto vyaktat sanatanaha, Vyakto vyaktat sanatanaha, Yassa sarveshu bhuteshu, Yassa sarveshu bhute, Nashyatsu na vinashyati, Nashyatsu na vinashyati, Avyakto ksharahit yuktaha, Avyakto ksharahit yuktaha, Tamahuh paramam gatam, Tamahuh paramam gatam, yam prapya nanivartante, yam prapya nanivartante, taddhama paramam gama mama, taddhama paramam mama, purusha sapara partha, purusha sapara partha, bhaktya labhyastvananyaya, bhaktya labhyastvananyaya, tasyantasthani bhutani, yasyantasthani bhutani, yena sarvamidam tatam, yena sarvamidam tatam. Very good. Let us set the context for today's class. In the end of the prior class, we saw Sri Krishna say that end of this verse, he says, Mam upetya, having reached me. And reaching Sri Krishna, as we said, he uses that, I said several times in the last class, having reached me is Sri Krishna's way of saying having reached Brahman, having reached enlightenment. So when he says having reached me, it doesn't mean that you travel to some loka and meet with him in that loka. It means that you become enlightened. You reach Brahman, you merge with Brahman. And the whole context of chapter 8, you remember, is end of life is the context. So at the end of your life, you merge with Brahman. In Sri Krishna's language, he says, you come to me. And coming to me, he says at the beginning of this verse, Abrahma bhuvanat lokaha punar avartinaha. He says that all lokas, any kind of heaven you can reach, is not the same as reaching Sri Krishna. Let me paraphrase that to say that reaching Sri Krishna at the end of your life is going beyond heaven. And that's a very lofty idea, beyond heaven, and that led us to the topic we just began at the end of the last class. The next topic is puranic cosmology. Cosmology, as you know, is the study of the cosmos, the universe. How did the universe come into existence? So Sri Krishna has led us to that discussion about Puranic cosmology. When I use that word cosmology, be a little bit careful, because cosmology and science uses instruments to measure light coming from distant stars, and based on their measurements, they make all kinds of amazing discoveries about the universe in which we live, including the fact that our present universe began with the Big Bang 14 billion years ago. This is science, this is scientific cosmology. Puranic cosmology is based not on scientific measurements, it's based on the Puranas. And the Puranas are collections of stories which teach us through the extensive use of symbolism. These stories are not historical stories. These stories are envisioned in the minds of great sages. The Puranas, after all, are attributed to the sage Vyasa. And based on their understanding and the symbolism they used, this elaborate system of cosmology has been developed. I'm hesitant to use the word mythology only because it pushes buttons. A lot of people don't like that word mythology because mythology suggests something that's kind of frivolous and fictitious, which the Puranas are not frivolous or fictitious, but they're not historical documents either. So, in my opinion, there's no harm in using the word mythological, but because it offends many people, because of this connotation of being frivolous and fictitious, it's maybe better not to say that. But it's important to distinguish. The Puranas from our Mahabharata. Mahabharata is historical, based on actual historical events. Puranas, when it tells the stories of the gods fighting with each other and the churning of the Milky Ocean, such stories are not historical. They didn't occur on a Tuesday or Wednesday. So that puts the Puranas in a different category. We can call that category ahistoric, non-historic. Okay, and with that introduction, we see we'll pick up where we left off in the last class. The beginning of Puranic cosmology is how did the universe get born? And in the last verse we saw, it gives this amazing image. I'll recount it very briefly. And that is Lord Mahavishnu is lying on his snake bed at the bottom of the Milky Ocean. From his navel emerges a lotus. The lotus opens. Inside the lotus is Brahmaji, the creator of the cosmos, who is asleep. During Brahmaji's sleep, the universe is in a state of dissolution. The term in Sanskrit, avyakta. Vyakta means manifest, avyakta, not manifest. And the metaphor that's often used is like a tree is avyakta, unmanifest, in a seed. So often they'll call it bija avastha, a seed condition. So the universe first exists in a seed condition. Brahmaji wakes up, and the universe emerges from its seed, so to speak, and the universe becomes manifest. Eventually, Brahmaji goes to sleep again, and then the universe goes into another state of dissolution. We're going to see the cyclic nature of this in our coming discussion. A comment about symbolism, and then we'll continue. This symbolism makes the creator of the universe seem very small, existing in that lotus that emerged from Vishnu's navel. This is the vastness of the minds of the ancient rishis who could even conceive of the world's creator as being small. They had a vision of something much greater even than the world's creator. It was very amazing vision when you can see that. Okay, with that introduction, let us proceed. Verse 18. Avyaktat vyaktaya sarvaha, avyaktat vyaktaya sarvaha, prabhavantyah ragame, prabhavantyah ragame, ratragame praliyante, ratragame praliyante, tatraiva vyakta sanyake, tatraiva vyakta sanyake. End of the second line, ahar agame, ahar day, agame, when the day comes. When the day comes, whose day? Not your day, the day in the life of Brahmaji. When the day comes for Brahmaji, then what? In the first line, sarvaha vyaktayaha, all beings, prabhavanti in the second line, come forth. All beings come forth from what? First line, avyaktat. From the unmanifest, the manifest comes forth. We discussed in our prior class that to suggest that something comes from nothing, creatio ex nihilo is the Latin expression for the biblical doctrine, creation out of nothing. This is illogical. There's no logical support for such a doctrine, and the ancient rishis absolutely rejected it. The universe comes not from nothing. The universe comes from an unmanifest condition, like a tree coming from a seed. And then in the third line, ratri agame, and then with the coming of night, first half was with the coming of day, the unmanifest universe becomes manifest. Second half, ratri agame, and with the coming of night, praliyante. Everything becomes unmanifest. All that was manifest becomes unmanifest again. Tatra, where, there, tatra eva, there indeed, avyakta sanyake. It resolves into that which is called avyakta. The universe, which is manifest, resolves into a condition which is unmanifest. In scientific cosmology, there used to be a theory. This theory, by the way, has been disproved. But there used to be a theory that the universe began with a Big Bang, and eventually the Big Bang would kind of run out of steam, so to speak, and the force of gravity would then cause the universe to gradually contract, and the contraction would continue until the universe finally collapsed, and I think they called it Big Crunch. So the universe began with a Big Bang, and the universe ends with a Big Crunch, which is very much like what's taught here. The universe goes through periods of manifestation and dissolution. We can imagine that if the universe went through a process of being crunched, it would then blow up again. I have to mention, though, that that theory has been disproved, I think just 20 years ago or so, fairly recently, where they discovered there is some force called dark energy that the scientists have no idea what it is. All they know is dark energy is causing the universe to expand continuously. So this is a fairly recent discovery. Obviously, it's not a complete discovery. They have no idea what is dark energy, but they do know that the universe continues to expand. How long will it expand? What will happen next? They don't know. But we do know that this theory of Big Bang and Big Crunch, that seems to have been dismissed, that theory, disproved. But here we have a cosmology which very much sounds like that, the universe going through periods of creation and dissolution. And I'll just remind you, we had a rather lengthy discussion in our last class about why the universe goes through these cycles of creation and dissolution. Remember, we talked about something, I may not have used the term samashti karma. Samashti means collective. Samashti karma means the collective karma of all living beings. Imagine that you are living at a time when the samashti karma, the karma of all living beings, is getting exhausted at exactly the same time. Pretty unlikely, given the fact that there are billions and billions of creatures, and having their karmas line up, so to speak, so that all of their karmas are going to complete, all living beings are going to die at exactly the same time due to the exhaustion of their karmas. Statistically, that's pretty improbable, but not impossible, right? According to statistics, there's a finite possibility that the lifespan of all living beings could line up, and when the samashti karma, the lifespan of all beings, lines up in such a way that all beings exhaust their karma at the same moment, that is said to trigger the dissolution of the universe. This is the cosmology, puranic cosmology. But then all those beings now are in an unmanifest condition, and they still have karma. We talked about sanchita karma. The karma is gained through an infinite number of prior lives, and eventually that sanchita karma needs to be fructified, so it then leads to the next manifestation of the universe. We discussed that in a prior class. Okay, continuing. Bhutagrama sahevayam, Bhutagrama sahevayam, Bhutva bhutva praliyate, Bhutva bhutva praliyate, Ratragameva shah partha, Ratragameva shah partha, Prabhavatyah ragame, Prabhavatyah ragame. Saha bhutagramaha, saha, that, bhutagrama, that collection of beings, eva, indeed, ayam, this collection of beings, bhutva bhutva, being reborn again and again. And reborn again and again means at the beginning of each cycle of universe. We're not talking about your individual rebirth here. He was talking about bhutagrama. Grama means collection, all beings. So the emergence of all beings from a state of being avyakta, unmanifest, into a state of being vyakta, manifest, meaning we're talking about at the beginning of the next cycle of creation. Brahmaji wakes up and the creation is on. Bhutva, bhutva, again and again this happens. Remember, way back in verse 3 of this chapter, we described karma, Sri Krishna described karma as a creative force, which is not a common way of describing karma. But here you can see very clearly, karma is a creative force insofar that it causes the unmanifest universe to become manifest again and again and again, bhutva, bhutva. But then eventually, praliyate. And the subject of the sentence here is still bhutagrama, the whole collection of beings, praliyate, eventually undergo dissolution when their lifespans all line up in such a way that they all exhaust their karmas at the same time, and the universe becomes unmanifest once again. When? In the third line, ratri agame, with the coming of night. Not last night, the night for Brahmaji, sitting in the lotus. Avashaha partha. O partha, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, this is avashaha, this is inevitable. The cycle of birth and death of the universe is inevitable. Therefore, you get born in this cyclic universe, so therefore your birth and death is cyclic and inevitable. And a quick comment here about the doctrine of karma, something that's often misunderstood. Everyone asks, so how did I get born in the first place? This is the most common question. How did I get born in the first time? But if you understand what a cycle is, a cycle has no beginning. Tell me, if you look at a circle, where does the circle begin? By definition, a circle has no beginning and no end. Sri Krishna here is describing, based on this puranic cosmology, Sri Krishna is describing an infinite cycle, an infinite series of prior universe verses. Infinity is not something we're accustomed to dealing with unless you studied math back in your college days as an engineering student. We had to study all of this math, and we became quite comfortable in dealing with negative infinity. There's a difference between negative infinity and positive infinity. There's a difference. And you can use infinities in your mathematical equations. So infinity is not such a remote concept to deal with. Beginninglessness. And what is beginningless is a cycle. So there have been an infinite number of prior universes. In an infinite number of prior universes, you have had an infinite number of prior births, which means there was no first birth. And according to the doctrine of karma, a first birth would be illogical. I pointed this out maybe 1 or 2 classes ago. And that is, if there were a first birth, then how did you get the karma for the first birth? If birth is a result of karma, and you have a first birth, there's no karma to cause a first birth. The whole doctrine of karma depends on this infinite series of prior births. Okay, enough said. Let's continue. Parastasmatu bhavonyo, parastasmatu bhavonyo, vyakto vyaktat sanatanaha, vyakto vyaktat sanatanaha, yassa sarveshu bhuteshu, yassa sarveshu bhuteshu, nashyatsu na vinashyati, nashyatsu na vinashyati. Now, next step in this Vedic cosmology is we shift our attention from Brahmaji in the lotus to Mahavishnu in the laying underneath. Symbolically, Brahmaji represents actually not just creator, but in symbolism, creator, sustainer, and so-called destroyer. Brahmaji, as long as he is awake, he sustains the universe. And when Brahmaji closes his eyes and goes to sleep, the universe becomes in a state of dissolution. So here symbolically, Brahmaji represents kind of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the creator, sustainer, and so-called destroyer of the universe. All three are symbolized by Brahmaji. The word we use to describe creator, sustainer, destroyer is Ishvara. Ishvara, the God of the cosmos, is the creator, sustainer, destroyer. So let that Brahmaji represent Ishvara. That Brahmaji is an emanation from Mahavishnu. Look at the symbolism. These ancient rishis, they had minds are just amazing. So they wanted to symbolically represent, and in a very delightful way and relatable way, they wanted to present something which in Advaita Vedanta is so mysterious and obscure and difficult to comprehend. In Advaita Vedanta, we say there is one reality. That one reality is Brahman, which is formless, has no qualities. Brahman is not a creator, sustainer, or destroyer. From Brahman's standpoint, there is no Ishvara, there is no universe, there is nothing but Brahman. This is the lofty view of Advaita Vedanta. So then we struggle, well, how to explain how the creator, sustainer, destroyer, Ishvara, and the entire cosmos, along with you and I, how did we all emerge from one non-dual Brahman? Well, here we have a beautiful image and metaphor. And that is, so Brahmaji represents Ishvara, who emerges from Vishnu with the help of this beautiful lotus. That beautiful lotus symbolically represents the power of Maya. The power of Maya is represented by that beautiful lotus. That lotus magically emerges. Who can explain a lotus emerging out of a navel, right? It's inexplicable. It's magic. One of the meanings of the word Maya happens to be magic. So magically, the lotus comes out of Vishnu's navel, Vishnu representing Brahman. Magically, Ishvara emerges from non-dual Brahman. Magically means due to the power of Maya. Ishvara is a manifestation of non-dual Brahman, and this is the symbolism. in order to make this symbolism work, I have to correct myself. And the correction is this. And I should go back actually and study the Bhagavata Purana where this comes and see exactly how it's presented. According to Advaita Vedanta, the lotus can't emerge because it means there was a time when the lotus had not yet emerged, which would mean there's a time when Brahmaji did not yet exist in the lotus. But that goes contrary then to the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, which hold that Ishvara never came forth from Brahman. Ishvara always was. Just as Brahman is a timeless, eternal reality, in the same way Ishvara is a timeless, eternal reality. The universe goes through cycles. Brahmaji can open his eyes and close his eyes. But Brahmaji, according to and again, I should check the Puranas to find out, but I think the way it has to work is that the lotus has always been there. From time immortal, from time eternal. The lotus was there from time eternal. Brahmaji was sitting in that lotus. So earlier I said the lotus emerged, and that I think is completely incorrect. The lotus did not emerge. Symbolically, the lotus could not have emerged. The lotus was always present, but the lotus is emerged from his navel, which is, as we said, inexplicable and magical. So that lotus indeed represents Maya, and Brahmaji sitting in that lotus represents then Ishvara. Now we take the next step, as I said, is turning our attention from Brahmaji and the lotus to Mahavishnu laying on the bottom of the ocean, which is to turn our attention from Ishvara, creator, sustainer, destroyer. We turn our attention to the Brahman, the underlying reality because of which Ishvara exists. And here the language, remember we're talking about cosmology, so the approach is in terms of the universe. We've already identified two kinds of universes. One is a universe which is avyakta. Let me start with a universe which is vyakta, manifest, the one in which we live. A universe in which is avyakta, unmanifest. And here he says, let me give a metaphor first. This will make so much more sense if I give a metaphor. Long ago, we used this dream metaphor to describe how Ishvara creates the universe, a universe which is within Ishvara, a universe which is non-separate from Ishvara. We said it's like when you dream a dream world. So you are the dreamer. You create a dream world. The dream world exists. The dream world is vyakta, manifest. But then, you, in addition to waking and dream, you also have periods of dreamless sleep, correct? So then, when you go from the dream state, swapna avastha, you go to the deep sleep state, sushupti avastha. When your dream comes to an end and you go into a state of dreamless sleep, what happens to your dream world? Your dream world was vyakta. Now your dream world becomes avyakta, unmanifest. And then when you have the next dream, by the way, they can actually measure, put electrodes on your head, and they can tell that you're having multiple dreams. And you yourself, you have multiple dreams in a night. So we go through these, I think there's a 50-minute cycle of dreaming and deep sleep. They've done a lot of studies about this. We go through cycles. What a nice metaphor. Look at this. Science has shown that you go through cycles at night, alternating. You go through periods of deep sleep, and then you wake up partially into a condition they called REM sleep, rapid eye motion sleep. Your eyes don't open, but they move around, and that's apparently during your dreams. And then you alternate every hour or so between these conditions of dreamless sleep and REM sleep. When you're having dreams, you go through cycles where the dream world is manifest and unmanifest. Manifest, unmanifest. Manifest, unmanifest. Your dream world is a good metaphor for this universe, going through periods of manifestation and dissolution. And of course, in addition to the dream world being manifest and the dream world being unmanifest, there's one more factor we should consider, and that factor is you, the dreamer. Third factor. One factor is the manifest dream. The other factor is the unmanifest dream world. Third factor is you, the dreamer. Now notice that the dream in the state of deep sleep, you, the dreamer, still exist in the absence of a manifest dream world. Now, I'm being too complicated here. During deep sleep, your dream world is avyakta, unmanifest. But you, the dreamer, still exist. So even in that state of that unmanifest state, you exist as the dreamer in the state of deep sleep in that unmanifest condition. Therefore, Sri Krishna considers it another unmanifest entity. He breaks it down into threefold. We'll see the verse in just a moment. He makes a threefold distinction between the manifest world, the unmanifest world, and a third unmanifest. I'm sorry, the third of the three, but a second unmanifest. Why am I making this so complicated? I'm sorry, it's not that complicated. Okay, so we have a manifest world, we have an unmanifest world, and Sri Krishna is going to say there's another unmanifest. Not an unmanifest world, an unmanifest reality, because of which the other two, and this is the dream metaphor. So just as your manifest dream and unmanifest dream depend on you, the dreamer, here Sri Krishna is going to say the manifest world and the unmanifest world depend upon another unmanifest, this other unmanifest being Brahman. Let's see the verse. Parastasmat tu bhavaha anyaha. The words are scattered around. Let me help you. Paraha tasmat. Tasmat. Paraha tasmat. Beyond that. Paraha tasmat. Beyond that. Beyond what? Middle of the second line, buried in the middle, is the word avyaktat. Tasmat avyaktat paraha. Other than that unmanifest. What unmanifest? The unmanifest universe that he was referring to in the prior verses. The universe going through cycles of manifestation and dissolution, unmanifest. So now he says beyond that unmanifest is what? Anyaha, end of the first line, and avyaktaha, beginning of the second line. The words are all jumbled here. Beyond the unmanifest is anyaha avyaktaha, another unmanifest. Anyaha bhavaha, another being that is avyaktaha. So beyond the unmanifest universe is a second unmanifest being, but there's a difference. The manifest universe comes and goes. I'm sorry, the unmanifest, I'm going to confuse the heck out of you. I'm doing a good job. The unmanifest universe comes and goes, but the second unmanifest doesn't come and go. Sri Krishna says it is sanatanaha, eternal. Look at this. Your deep sleep state, in which your dream world is unmanifest, that deep sleep state comes and goes. You go through cycles of REM sleep and deep sleep state. Comes and goes. But you, the dreamer, don't come and go. That's what Sri Krishna is describing here. So beyond the unmanifest universe is another unmanifest being, which is sanatanaha, eternal, doesn't go through cycles of manifestation and dissolution. What is that second unmanifest? This is Brahman. We're now shifting our attention from Brahmaji in a lotus to Mahavishnu laying down on the bottom of the ocean. We're shifting our attention from the world and Ishvara, shifting our attention to Brahman, the underlying reality because of which the cyclic universe exists. And that's what Sri Krishna describes here. He says in the third line, Sarveshu bhuteshu nashyatsu. When all beings, sarveshu, all, bhuteshu, beings, nashyatsu, when they are destroyed. When all beings are destroyed, and here destroyed doesn't mean absent. Destroyed means in an unmanifest condition, a seed condition. So when the universe has become unmanifest, when all beings have gone into this unmanifest condition, then what? Yaha saha, this that we're talking about, this second unmanifest, which is eternal, na vinashyati, doesn't get destroyed, doesn't become unmanifest. This unmanifest doesn't become further unmanifest, doesn't go through cycles of manifestation and dissolution. We're using this language of puranic cosmology to describe, not we, Sri Krishna is using this language of puranic cosmology to describe Brahman, the unchanging reality because of which this cycle of universes comes and goes. So Sri Krishna has said that reality we call Brahman is sanatanaha, eternal. In the last line, na vinashyati, doesn't get destroyed, means doesn't undergo any change. Just as you, the dreamer, undergo no fundamental change, as dream worlds come and go, you remain unchanged. In the same way, Brahman, the absolute fundamental reality because of which the universe exists, remains fundamental and unchanging as the universes come and go. By the way, when you're laying in bed, do you have to do anything to make dreams come? Do you do anything to make dreams stop? Do you make any effort to transition from this deep sleep state to REM state, dreams, and then back again? You don't do anything. You just lay there blissfully asleep. So it's quite a good metaphor. Lord Vishnu, he's not presented as being asleep, but he makes no effort. Laying on the bottom of the ocean, making no effort at all. If anyone makes effort, it's Brahmaji. But what is Brahmaji's effort? His only effort is to open his eyes and go back to sleep. So even Brahmaji doesn't really make effort. The universe comes and goes, not due to Vishnu's effort, not even due to Brahmaji's effort. The universe comes and goes. Why? We discussed. Due to karma. Correct? So, which means it's not that Ishvara decides, oh, it's time to create the universe. And certainly it's not that Brahman does anything. Brahman does nothing. Ishvara doesn't decide. The universe just comes and goes. Karma is the reason. Okay. Oh, here's one more comment here before we continue. I scribble on this before coming to class. One of my scribbles says that the modern science continues to study cosmology, this Big Bang, and the question is, the science will continue to know more and more about the universe. Of course, the universe is infinite in complexity. So the scientists are knowing more and more about an infinite universe. The more the scientists know about the universe, the broader the boundaries of the universe appear to be. So scientists themselves admit, with this wonderful expression, scientists will say that we know more and more about less and less. And when they say about less and less, it's because the boundaries of the known universe keep receding, and perhaps receding faster than our knowledge advances. It's like chasing a horizon. When do you reach the horizon? Science is chasing the horizon of knowledge. When will science get there? Never. The point here then is, will scientific cosmology ever result in a discovery of the underlying reality because of which the Big Bang existed? This is the point. Science has no access to that level of reality. The horizons of science will continue to expand and expand and expand, but science is limited to the realm of the observable and measurable, and Brahman lies outside the realm of the observable and measurable. So this is the limit of scientific cosmology. Okay, next. Avyakto kshara yuktaha, avyakto kshara yuktaha, tamahuh paramam gatim, tamahuh paramam gatim, yam prapya nani vartante, yam prapya nani vartante, tadhama paramam mama, tadhama paramam mama. Aksharaha avyaktaha iti uktaha. So this second akshara, this second unmanifest we're talking about, the first one being the unmanifest universe, the second one being Brahman. So now that's our topic. So this aksharaha, the second unmanifest we're talking about here, Brahman, it says how to differentiate the two. We have one akshara that comes and goes, the unmanifest universe. We have another akshara that doesn't come and go, Brahman. How to differentiate it? The second one is iti uktaha. It is called thus. What is it called? Aksharaha, unchanging, immutable, eternal. So the second akshara, the one which is Brahman, is called Akshara. In fact, Akshara Brahma is one of the titles for this chapter. I told you this chapter has several names. One of the names for this title is Akshara Brahma, from this word here. So that Brahman, which tam ahuhu, tam, that Brahman, that immutable, that word aksharaha. Kshara means to decay, to undergo change. Akshara, that which doesn't decay, that which undergoes no change. And our philosopher friends like this word immutable. So actually quite a very clear word. Immutable, that which doesn't go through mutation, unchangeable. So immutable is a fancy word for unchangeable. So that immutable, unchangeable Brahman, the universe comes and goes, Brahman doesn't undergo any change whatsoever, and tam ahuhu, that immutable Brahman they call paramam gatim, the gati, the goal, which is parama, supreme, the supreme goal. This is a reference now to many teachings of Vedanta which describe, remember our context also, end of life is our context. So at the end of life, what happens to the enlightened person? The enlightened person so merges, so to speak, into Brahman. Since the enlightened person merges into Brahman at the end of life, then that Brahman is called the Paramam Gatim, the ultimate goal. You notice I said merges, so to speak. How do you merge into that from which you're already non-separate? To use our famous metaphor, when this pot gets broken, does it merge into clay? What? Look at the language very carefully. Does it merge into clay? It's already clay. So if we say it merges into clay, we're using the word merge figuratively. Because really speaking, the pot is already non-separate from clay. So for the enlightened person, merging into Brahman is like this pot merging into clay. This pot is already clay. The enlightened person is already Brahman. So therefore, when we use that word merging, it's really used kind of figuratively, not literally. So that Brahman is the Paramam Gatim, the ultimate goal unto which the enlightened person figuratively merges at the end of life. Yam prapya, and having merged figuratively into that Brahman, na nivartante, they don't return. They don't return because we gave two explanations for that. We said either their karmas were destroyed, that sanchita karma, that infinite sanchita karma was burnt up in the fire of knowledge. There are many scriptures which use that language, that the enlightened person, due to the intensity of their knowledge, that knowledge that they gain, enlightenment, has the power, the capacity to figuratively burn up that infinite accumulation of karmas. That's a very typical way of explaining it. In our last class, I gave you an alternate way of explaining it, and that was, instead of the karmas being destroyed, the enlightened person's ownership of the karmas is destroyed. The ownership of karmas due to ego, individuality, ahankara, and the enlightened person, the enlightenment absolutely destroys that egoicity, that sense of individuality. The reality of the individual gets destroyed. So therefore we can say the ownership of that karma is destroyed. Either way, there's no rebirth. If the karmas are destroyed, there's no rebirth. If your ownership of those karmas are reborn, there's no rebirth. Back in chapter, as we discussed before, verse 3, Sri Krishna says, karma is that creative force. So if that karma is absent for the enlightened person who dies, there's no creative force available that would drive another rebirth. And therefore the enlightened person is not rebirth. And just to remind you this, we sometimes take this for granted, but actually, non-Hindus often ask this question, and that is, what's so bad about being reborn again? It's a common question. Even Hindus will ask that question. What's so bad about rebirth? And the point is, we talked about this briefly, and I'll just remind you briefly, there is no such thing as rebirth. Let me put it in different terms. rebirth equals suffering. Full stop. Rebirth equals suffering. Not that life is only suffering. And if you're born into heaven, you don't suffer at all. But even if you're born into heaven, you don't stay in heaven forever. You get reborn again, and sooner or later, you suffer. So the equation then, if we can call it an equation, is rebirth equals suffering. Merging into Brahman equals no suffering. This is why freedom from rebirth is a common way of describing this goal. So, nani vartante, they never return, they never get born again, they remain figuratively merged in Brahman. And Sri Krishna concludes, tad dhamma, that abode, referring to Brahman, paramam mama, that is my abode. The merging in Brahman means merging in me, using Sri Krishna's language. So he uses that consistently. To merge into me, Sri Krishna says, is to merge into Brahman. They remain non-separate from me, Sri Krishna says, means they remain non-separate from Brahman. We'll see just one more verse. Purusha sapara partha, Purusha sapara partha, bhaktya labhyastvananyaya, bhaktya labhyastvananyaya, yasyantasthani bhutani, yasyantasthani bhutani, yena sarvamidam tatam, yena sarvamidam tatam. Partha, O Arjuna, saha paraha purushaha. Saha, that. That is the paraha purushaha, the supreme being, and being not in the sense of a human being, the ultimate existence, the absolute reality, Brahman. Saha purushaha paraha, that is the supreme being, meaning that is Brahman, that into which the enlightened ones merge at the end of their lives. That which is, drop down to the third line, that which yasya, for whom, or in whom, antasthani bhutani. So, antasthani bhutani, it abides in all beings. That reality called Brahman is that which abides in all beings. Abides here like clay abides in pot. Funny way of putting it, right? Clay abides in pot. Like clay abides in a pot, Brahman abides in you. So oftentimes we have the sense to abide means to kind of, you've all seen these pictures, lithographs of Lord Krishna standing inside of someone's heart, shining brightly. And it's a beautiful image, but that's misleading in a manner of speaking, because it's not that Brahman abides in you as some little shining being located in your heart. Brahman abides in you like pot abides in clay, like clay. Sorry, I got it backwards. Clay abides in pot. Leading us to question which is more correct, to say that clay, this funny language, Pujya Swamiji liked to play with this particular language. He would ask, is clay in the pot, or is this pot existing in clay? He liked to tease us with these expressions, which really make you think. So we get mixed up about what is the true reality here, and the true reality is not pot, it's just nama rupa, just name and form. The true reality is clay. So we can say that clay is in the pot, but more accurate to say the pot exists in clay. In the same way, we can say Brahman abides in you, that divinity abides in you, but we can turn it around and say more correctly, and to say you abide in Brahman, you nama rupa, that exists because of Brahman. And that Brahman in the last line, that Brahman is yena, that because of which sarvam idam tatam, sarvam idam, this entire universe, tatam, is pervaded. So Brahman abides in you and pervades the universe, but we turn it around and say, you exist in Brahman, the universe exists in Brahman, Brahman is a reality because of which everything exists. The interesting line here is the one I skipped over, the second line. Bhaktya labhyaha tu ananyaya. That Brahman is labhyaha, attainable. Attainable how? Bhaktya, through bhakti. What kind of bhakti? You have to break the words apart. To, but specifically bhakti, which is ananyaya. Ananya bhakti. Ananya means not other, non-separate. A bhakti which is non-separate, which means the feeling of non-separation. And to put it in the language of bhakti, the feeling of being non-separate from your beloved. That's the language of bhakti. The feeling of being non-separate from your beloved is ananya bhakti. And through this ananya bhakti, this feeling of non-separation, you reach Brahman. Brahman is labhyaha. Now, to finish our class with an interesting observation. Here Sri Krishna says Brahman is reached through bhakti. Suppose you only read this chapter. What would you conclude? Brahman is reached through bhakti. But suppose this, remember we're discussing puranic cosmology. And this discussion of puranic cosmology just happens to occur in chapter 8. Suppose this discussion of puranic cosmology occurred in chapter 2, where Sri Krishna taught jnanam, spiritual wisdom. If this discussion occurred in chapter 2, then Sri Krishna would say that Brahman is labhyaha, is gained, not bhaktya, not through bhakti. He would have said jnanena, through knowledge. If this discussion came in chapter 2, Sri Krishna would say that Brahman is gained through knowledge. If this discussion came in chapter 3, Sri Krishna would say that Brahman is gained through karma yoga. And if this discussion came in chapter 6, Sri Krishna would say dhyanena, Brahman is gained through meditation. Here in chapter 8, you might remember we discussed that the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are dedicated to bhakti. Because this discussion about Vedic cosmology comes in chapter 8, therefore he says, bhaktya labhyaha. Brahman is gained through bhakti. You can see how so many people get confused when they study the Bhagavad Gita. And you get confused because by the time you're studying chapter 8, you've forgotten chapter 2. And chapter 3 and chapter 6 and everything that's come before. No wonder we get confused. In order to understand the message of any scripture, including the Bhagavad Gita, you have to know the whole thing, which is why we study the Bhagavad Gita in this class, so that we can understand the whole thing. But one of the biggest hazards in scriptural study is to excerpt something out of context, like here, bhaktya labhyaha. Brahman is gained through bhakti. And to take that statement out of context completely distorts Sri Krishna's teachings. So he's already taught that jnanam is required. He's already taught that karma yoga is required. He's already taught that meditation is required. Now he's teaching that bhakti is required. And if you say, which one leads to discovery of Brahman, you've made a huge blunder. Which one? Sri Krishna says they're all required. You don't get to pick and choose. Just a closing comment here. One of the biggest problems that's occurred in these teachings of Vedanta in modern times, and this is a fairly modern conception, that you get to pick and choose which path you follow to reach Brahman. This is a modern concept. It's not an ancient concept. It's a modern concept to say the intellectual people can choose the path of jnanam, knowledge. Emotional people can choose the path of bhakti. Contemplative people can choose the path of meditation. Active people can choose the path of karma. This is a very modern concept. It's very misleading, and sadly, it's harmful. That's a strong word. Why is it harmful? As soon as you label yourself an intellectual person, and I'm on the path of jnanam, you've now closed your mind to the other three, which are necessary, important. The moment you say, you label yourself, oh, I'm a karma yogi, you then exclude from your thinking the pursuit of jnanam and the cultivation of bhakti and the performance of meditation. What a huge disservice to yourself by labeling yourself in one of these ways. To label yourself, I am on this path, I am on that path, really does harm to your process of spiritual growth. We need all four. If we're going to call it these four, we need all four. We need spiritual wisdom, we need meditation, we need karma yoga, we need bhakti. If you exclude any one of the four, your process of spiritual growth will not be successful. And you can see then how by selectively excerpting spiritual teachings, you can support such a modern misconception of getting to pick and choose. The big picture, when you study the Bhagavad Gita from beginning to end, and sorry to be sarcastic, when you get to the end and you remember what you started at the beginning, which means that you comprehend the whole of the Bhagavad Gita, understanding the scripture in as a whole, then you understand you don't get to pick and choose. You require all four of these sadhanas. And you've heard me joke about this. I'll end with this joke. Not only do you need these four sadhanas, we need all the help we can get. So how idiotic it would be to deprive ourselves of something so helpful. To see, oh, bhaktya labdhya, oh, thank goodness I don't have to pursue jnanam. Thank goodness I don't have to be a karma yogi. All I need to do is pray. This is just absurd and it's harmful. We need all the help we can get. That's a good place to conclude our class. We'll continue. There's a new topic that comes. We'll see that with the next class. I'll just share with you something very happy, I think very happy. At the end of the last class, I announced that I was publishing a new video. This video is on if the world is an illusion, why does it seem so real? And I just want to share with you the happy news that the video is being very well received. In just a few days, more than 10,000 people have watched the video. That makes me happy because many more people now are being exposed to these teachings, and that YouTube turns out to be a wonderful mode for outreach. And so, if you haven't watched that video, you might enjoy it. It came out quite well. I put quite a bit of effort into it. If you haven't seen it yet, please look at that video. If the world is an illusion, why does it seem so real? It's a very deep investigation of Advaita Vedanta. Okay, we'll conclude with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Vamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastumam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Utabasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Hamritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat Om